Well, now we can speak to Bradley Bowman, who is a Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. I should say he also previously served as a National Security Advisor to members of the US Senate Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee. So perfectly placed to speak to us. You're very welcome. We were hearing a little earlier from the Pentagon spokesperson, John Kirby, very clear to say that troops will not be, US troops, I should say, will not be deployed in Ukraine. How much of a threat do you think troops being deployed to places like Germany, Romania, Poland will be for Russia?
Thank you for the opportunity to join you. Thanks for the question. I think they are a zero threat to Russia. NATO is a collective defense alliance. NATO is not Napoleon threatening Russia. NATO is not Nazi Germany threatening Russia. And Putin knows it. As the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, this is a situation entirely fabricated by the Kremlin to try to coerce Kyiv. And it's based on a might makes right model where Vladimir Putin says, I'm more powerful than you, Ukraine. I can tell you what to do and with whom to associate. And so these are prudent steps I think the Biden administration is taking to send a clear message that the United States will honor its Article 5 NATO commitments, but will not send combat troops to Ukraine. Instead, they're sending up 6 shipments already of defensive weapons to Ukraine so Ukraine can defend itself.
And so what do you think would be a deterrent for Mr. Putin and Russia to pull back, to de-escalate? That's a word we've heard a lot today.
Right. I think additional defensive weapons to Ukraine. I think the Biden administration to send weapons is positive, but it's insufficient and belated. I'm so glad to see countries like the United Kingdom and Poland and the Baltic countries and others stepping forward to provide arms to Ukraine. These weapons, don't believe the Kremlin talking points to your audience. I would say these are not an offensive threat to Moscow. This will simply raise the cost of aggression and hopefully change Putin's mind or convince him that he cannot achieve his political objectives in Ukraine with additional aggression against Ukraine.
So how do you see this playing out? You know, we've had a lot of, I suppose, high-stakes diplomacy over the past few days that continue today. We're also hearing from Russians how they're feeling at the moment. We've heard from Ukrainians as well, of course, so worried about what might happen on their borders. How do you see it?
My heart goes out to the people of Ukraine. I mean, they've suffered the invasion in 2014 of Crimea and the illegal annexation. They've seen since that time the Russian-backed separatists in the Donbass, where roughly 14,000 people has died. They've seen cyber attacks and information warfare. So and they have roughly 100,000 combat troops all around their borders on almost every side, including in Transnistria to the west and in occupied Crimea. So the best way to de-escalate this is for those Russian soldiers to return to their bases and make clear in a believable way with their actions that there won't be another Russian military invasion of Ukraine.
But I suppose the question is there, how can President Putin do that without losing face? I mean, do you have an idea what his end game really is with this whole debacle that's been happening over the past few weeks in particular?
I do. I think he's trying to do what former U.S. Secretary of State George Shultz is called casting the shadow of power over the negotiating table. I think he's trying to get a commitment that Ukraine would never join NATO. That I think conceding that would be a betrayal of NATO's democratic principles, of American principles and transatlantic principles. It's two worldviews. It's might, right authoritarianism versus rule of law, territorial integrity and national sovereignty, the kinds of things that Russia committed to honor in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, which they're blowing off now.
Bradley Bowman, thank you so much for speaking to us here on BBC News. We'll wait and see what happens in the coming hours, really, and days.